Okay, hello. Dr. Michael Carper here again. I'm going to finish book one here. Uh, Again, I realize we are behind. Um, I did want to ask, I hope everyone received my announcement that I posted on Canvas. I did ask to receive a response from you. And I have not received any responses. If you could go ahead and do that, please. And we're going to talk about the first assignment here when I finish this lecture, okay? So I want to get right to it, though. And actually, I'm going to try and do two lectures here today. It's about 5:30 here in St. Louis, Missouri. And so let's begin. So last we left off, Socrates was having a conversation with Polemarchus, right, about what is justice. And we realized that Polemarchus's main definition, that justice is benefiting friends and harming enemies, doesn't really work. One of the big reasons that Socrates ends the conversation with is that justice would seem to be the sort of thing that doesn't do harm to anyone. Justice is designed to improve human capacity, human function. It's designed to make human beings better, not worse. But harm implies that you're making someone or something worse, not better. And so it is never just to harm anyone, including one's enemies. That's an interesting idea, isn't it? Well, because Socrates makes that point, Thrasymachus jumps into the discussion, and he jumps in quite violently, right? Which might say something about him, and actually it might speak to the position that he takes as well. When he enters the conversation, Thrasymachus is quite sarcastic with Socrates. And we don't have time to go over all of the little details here. There are a lot of interesting details. One of the things, though, that Thrasymachus accuses Socrates of is that Socrates doesn't seem to give any answers himself. He only asks questions. And Thrasymachus thinks that's easy. Why, Socrates, don't you answer your own question? Right? And of course, Socrates says, because I don't have an answer. That's what he says, or something to that effect, right? I don't have an answer. That's why I'm asking you. I'm hoping you know. And before Thrasymachus gives his definition of justice, which we'll get to in just a second, he does say one other important thing that I think we should note. And that is that if Socrates loses the conversation, and Thrasymachus, of course, expects him to lose, he says Socrates should have to pay a fine, pay some kind of monetary penalty for losing, right? Socrates, you remember, says, if I lose, I should pay the typical penalty, which is to learn from another human being, to be humbled by someone else's superior wisdom. But that's not good enough for Thrasymachus. Thrasymachus wants more. He wants a penalty in money, right? That's interesting. So, I want to make some mention on the board here, though, of the different orientations between Socrates and Thrasymachus, okay? In the way they approach this question, what is justice? It's very interesting. Socrates is the philosopher in the dialogue. Okay? He's part of philosophy, okay? Whereas Thrasymachus is coming from the school of thought of the sophists. He's one of the sophists. He's not a philosopher. There's a big difference between the two. The sophists were very popular at this time in ancient Athens, historically. And they were very popular as teachers. And here's why. It's because, and I hope you can see this up here, it's because the sophists taught people how to win an argument. They taught people in the art of debate. They were oriented towards victory in a conversation, winning at all costs. That was their goal. That's what they promised people that they would teach them if someone signed up in their school. Okay? Philosophy, on the other hand, is oriented towards something very different. It is oriented towards truth or wisdom. Okay? In fact, the word philosophy literally breaks down into philo, is a variation on the word for one of the words that the Greeks used for love. It actually means friendship love. Okay? And Sophie is a variation on the word Sophia, which is one of the Greek words for wisdom. Philosophy means the love of wisdom. A philosopher is therefore a lover of wisdom. But the sophists were about winning an argument. Philosophers were about finding wisdom or truth, no matter what it is. All we need to do is find what the truth is. Even if the truth proves to be pretty dark or ugly or scary, in some way, we need to just find the truth. The sophists are not oriented towards truth. They are oriented towards victory. Does that make some sense, or help make some sense of this discussion that takes place? A rather heated discussion, don't you think, between Socrates and Thrasymachus. Okay? Very good. Well, that's important material here to help understand what's going on here, what's going on in the first few pages after Thrasymachus pounces on the group and violently enters the conversation. Well, at the top of page 15 in your text, Thrasymachus finally breaks down and gives what he believes justice is. Justice is nothing other than what is advantageous for the stronger. Justice is the advantage of the stronger. Write that down. That's his definition. Justice is the advantage of the stronger. Isn't that interesting? In other words, whoever is strongest, whoever has the most might, gets to determine what justice is. Right? Might makes right. Have you ever heard that phrase before? That's a popular phrase. Might makes right. Those with power get to determine what justice is. So for Thrasymachus, power is what creates justice. Is that what Socrates thinks? Well, Socrates clearly is kind of taken aback, I think, initially by this. But he doesn't disagree with Thrasymachus immediately, does he? But he just starts questioning him. What is Thrasymachus's first bit of evidence in favor of his definition, would you say? Well, he says in the middle of page 15, no matter what form of government exists in a country or a city or a state, whether it's tyranny, which is by one man, aristocracy, which is ruled by a few, or democracy, which is ruled by the majority. So you've got rule by one, ruled by the minority, ruled by the majority, right? No matter what form of government we're talking about, it's always the same, Thrasymachus says. They always make rules and laws that are in their favor, not the people they're ruling, not in favor of the people they're ruling. And Thrasymachus thinks this is obvious, right? Yeah. So, hence, justice is the advantage of the stronger. Okay? What is Socrates' first point to kind of see whether or not this is true? He asks the question, don't rulers make mistakes when they rule? Thrasymachus has to admit, yeah, no one's infallible. Everyone makes mistakes, including rulers as they are trying to rule in their own self-interest, right? Very, very good. I hope you're following this. I think this is an interesting line of thought, don't you think? Everyone is liable to error to some degree. Well, Socrates makes the point, if a ruler makes an error, a mistake in some act of ruling, then suddenly the power relationship gets flip-flopped, right? Because now justice is not the advantage of the stronger, but it's the advantage of the weaker. The person being ruled who's now benefiting from the error or mistake of the ruler. See Socrates' point? So is it just to obey them? To obey rulers when they make mistakes? Well, then there's a little bit of a discussion about, well, okay, when we're talking about what seems to be to my advantage, let's say I'm the ruler, on page 17, there's an addition made to the definition. And that is, not only is justice the advantage of what the stronger believes to be his advantage, but it actually has to be to his advantage, correct? So we get a distinction made between belief and reality, right? This is important. This will play. Did you get that down? Belief and reality. So, justice is the advantage of the stronger only when not only do they believe to be something they believe to be to their advantage, but it has to actually be to their advantage. Well, Thrasymachus doesn't really seem to think this helps that much, right? Because he says in the middle of page 17, do you think I would call someone who is in error stronger at the very moment he errs? This is a great comeback on Thrasymachus' part against Socrates, don't you think? What is Thrasymachus really saying here? Well, he's saying that when I say justice is the advantage of the stronger, I mean justice is the advantage of the strong ruler to the degree that he or she doesn't make any errors. In other words, the ruler who makes the fewest errors is the stronger ruler. So what you have to say here, Socrates, doesn't affect my definition at all. Does that make sense, everyone? Let me know if it doesn't, okay? Again, I really wish you were right here with me. We'd be having so much fun together studying this wonderful philosophy book and talking in person with each other and seeing everyone's wonderful faces. But we will have to just work with what we're given, correct? So that's why Thrasymachus says the most precise answer is this. A ruler, to the extent that he is a ruler, never makes errors. That's what it means to rule, to have power over somebody. It means you're not making errors in the exercise of that power. And so, nice try, Socrates, but your criticism doesn't work here. What do you think? Do you think this is a good comeback? There is an interesting exchange at the top of page 18, where Socrates says, do you think I'm trying to harm you when I issue a criticism? Or do you think I'm just trying to find the truth of the matter? Thrasymachus thinks Socrates is trying to harm him, right? He makes that clear. He doesn't trust Socrates. Should Socrates trust Thrasymachus? Does he trust Thrasymachus? Does he seem to bear ill will towards Thrasymachus? What do you think? Well, Socrates comes back with a different line of questioning, right? And what is that? Well, he starts talking about crafts again. Did you notice that? Doctors, sailors, captains, shipbuilders, anything like that, right? And what seems to be the point here? When a doctor practices medicine, does he practice medicine for his own sake, for the benefit of him, or for the benefit of his patient? The recipient, the receiver of his craft, this craft known as medicine. A ship's captain, does he practice his captain craft for the sake of himself or the sake of the sailors and the ship underneath him that he is ruling over? See Socrates' point? It seems that Socrates is correct here. This is an interesting line of questioning that he's doing. It seems that no kind of knowledge considers or enjoins what is advantageous for itself. I'm at the top of page 20, by the way, sorry. No kind of knowledge considers or enjoins what is advantageous for itself, but what is advantageous for the weaker, which is subject to it. Doctors try to help patients. Captains try to help sailors. Home builders try to help home buyers who are out, don't have a home or are looking for a home and therefore are in need of a home, right? So home builders try to help home buyers. Plumbers try to help people with plumbing problems who are in need of a plumber, right? And so on and so forth. All crafts and forms of knowledge seem to be practiced this way, right? Socrates' overall point is every craft or form of knowledge is practiced for the sake of the recipient, not the sake of the craftsman himself. Does that make sense? I think he's right about that. That's the logic of the relationship, of the craft relationship, right? And so Obviously, Socrates is implying this is the case too with political ruling, right? Rulers and the ruled. Make sense? Well, at the top of page 21, notice we're going a little bit faster now. I'm trying to just show the main points in the conversation and the arguments, okay? The big moves that are being made here. But this is an interesting tennis match, don't you think? Socrates hits the ball across the net and Thrasymachus hits it right back. And so we got a back and forth conversation going here, right? Well, Thrasymachus, the ball comes back to his side of the court, and what does he do? He hits it right back. What does he say at the top of page 21? Socrates, don't you know there's a difference between sheep and shepherds? Interesting comment. Shepherding, certainly back then, was a craft, was a fairly common craft, right? There were a lot of shepherds back then. Not so many now, or we don't call them shepherds, right? People who take care of cows and sheep and goats and herd animals like that. But do you see what Thrasymachus is really saying? So Socrates, remember, was saying all crafts are set up to benefit the receiver of the craft, not the craftsman himself. And what does Thrasymachus say? Not all crafts, Socrates. Not all. Shepherds and sheep, that's one craft, and he likens that craft to the ruled craft relationship. The ruling craft. Politicians, right? They don't practice their craft for the sake of the receivers of their craft. They practice it for their own sake, for their own self-interest. Do you see what he's arguing here? Shepherds, after all, fatten the sheep for the slaughter, right? Cow herders do the same with cows. They're not interested in the cow's well-being. They're only interested in the cow's well-being to the degree that it helps them, the herdsman, right? The raiser of the cattle, the raiser of the sheep. So, again, Socrates, you failed to see that ruling and justice, which has to do with ruling, is engaged in for the sake of the stronger man, the one who's ruling. It's for his self-interest, not the interests of those he's ruling. And he goes into more detail on page 21, right? He gives examples. When it comes to contracts and partnerships, the just man always gets less than the unjust man. The unjust man finds ways to cheat and to get more out of the contract than the just man. Just man's kind of naive, right? The just man pays more taxes than the unjust man. And finally, in political office, the unjust man uses political office to network and gain more influence and power over others and to benefit his friends. Oh, remember that? Benefiting friends? And to benefit friends so that he can ask favors of them later and that kind of thing. Whereas the just man is truly just and doesn't do that. He's not interested in furthering himself. He only works for the advantage of his city or state. Right? At the bottom of page 21, Thrasymachus talks about how tyranny uses two means to get its way. These are the two main means for injustice. Here's the way injustice works. Force and what he calls covert means, which is just a fancy term for deception. Force and deception are how the unjust man gets his way and gets the better of everyone around him. Okay? See the point here? And so did you notice how Thrasymachus' definition of justice changes towards the top of page 22? He's no longer wanting to argue that justice is the advantage of the stronger, right? What does he really want to argue? He really wants to argue that injustice is better than justice. Injustice is stronger than justice. Injustice is more advantageous than justice. Injustice will make one happy. Justice will make one sad, and it leads to a life of suffering. Isn't that interesting? So, give me one moment here. Okay. So, all right. I hope that, so that's the real argument Thrasymachus wants to make. And Socrates asks the interesting question. In the middle of page 23, do you think that those who rule cities, the ones who are truly rulers, rule willingly? And it's a question he answers 2 pages later, right? In the middle of page 25, Socrates gives a little speech there about who the better ruler is. This is a really important question you need to write down. Who makes a better ruler politically? Someone who desires to rule or someone who does not desire to rule? What do you think? Isn't that a good question? I always enjoy having class discussions on that. In fact, why don't you write a response paper on this question? Okay, what you think about it. But we're going to give Socrates' response. What does Socrates seem to think? Thrasymachus clearly thinks the one who most wants to rule, that's going to make the best ruler, right? Justice is the advantage of the stronger ruler, after all. And someone who desires to rule strongly is going to be stronger, right? But Socrates says, no. Only the reluctant ruler is the good ruler. Someone who does not desire to rule makes a better ruler. Why? Why do you think? Well, don't people go into ruling and politics precisely for a variety of other motives and reasons other than wanting to do what's best for their city or state or country, right? And maybe even we could talk about universities and schools and other kinds of social entities, right? That this would apply to. The person who really wants political ruling, wants political office, oftentimes wants it for the wrong reasons. Does that make sense? I think so. They want it because of the possible wealth that is in it for them, the power and influence that they can achieve over others, being able to network. And here's a big one. How about prestige and people looking up to you and thinking you're a great person precisely because you're a senator or you're a representative or you're a president or a vice president or any number of offices like that, right? They think of you as very important. There's a lot of prestige and praise and good reputation that goes with becoming a political ruler, right? If this is what's driving a person, though, are they going to make the best laws and rule in the best way? Probably not. And that's Socrates' point. The person you want ruling you is someone who doesn't want to rule, and the only reason why they do it is they don't want someone who's truly bad for the city to win instead, to win the office. Does that make sense? That's the argument Socrates makes on page 25. They do it to prevent a worse ruler from getting into office instead. They only run for office out of a sense of duty or obligation, rather than being driven by desire to rule. There's a big difference between duty and desire. Does that make sense? Okay. Well, we're moving through this more quickly now, but we're seeing how some really amazing ideas here, right, that are opening up. Well, what does Socrates say in response, in more of a response to what Thrasymachus is arguing here? Another point Socrates makes is that if it weren't for wages attached to a craft, it would be the logical case that crafts always benefit the receivers of those crafts. Remember that? And that's why we add wages to it. What wages are indicating, what wages imply is that if you're a plumber and you fix the plumbing in my house, I need to pay you. Why? Because you've benefited me, which is precisely Socrates' point, right? You've done me a great good. And so now I'm going to pay you for that benefit that you've given me. I owe you now. That's what wages are, right? The problem is the moment you add wages to any job, craft, or ruling sort of relationship, now all of a sudden, that craftsman might start looking at the wages more than the benefit they're giving the receivers of their craft. I hope this makes sense. And we see this all the time in real life, don't we? Where doctors are more interested in making lots of money and charging high prices for their medical care, right, and medical advice, than they are interested in curing patients and helping people with their sickness. And that's the case with any craft, possibly. Auto mechanics often lie about what's wrong with cars, somebody's car, right, so that they can charge more money. And so this is an interesting relationship once we start adding compensation for the craft in question. How does this apply to ruling? That's the big question. How does this apply to justice? Where does justice fit in all of this, right? Where does justice fit? Do you see how this is starting to really materialize now? The ideas are really starting to fly off the page now, right? And getting us to think about what justice really is, right? Okay, very good. Well, remember, Thrasymachus changes his argument. From a definition of justice, justice is the advantage of the stronger, to a relationship between justice and injustice, its opposite, by arguing that injustice is better than justice overall. It's stronger, it's more advantageous, more beneficial to oneself, and it will make one happier. Okay? Well, how does Socrates come back on this? He starts talking about other crafts again, doesn't he? Right? And he's trying to relate it to justice. And remember, we have this question. If justice is a kind of knowledge, is it like a craft knowledge, or is it some other kind of knowledge? Because remember, a doctor, you could have the most brilliant doctor who knows almost everything there is to know about medicine. And yet, if he's an unjust person, he might use that knowledge to do what? To harm someone rather than to heal or help them. See the point? So, does a musical person, music is a craft of some kind, it's a kind of knowledge. Does a musical person try to get the better of and outdo and get the advantage of another musical person? The answer there seems to be no, but maybe I'm not quite so sure, right? Some of you, I know music is very important in China. China has produced many great musicians, and musicians sometimes do compete with one another, don't they? For a spot in the orchestra, or maybe the lead spot in an orchestra. Interesting kind of debate here, right? But Socrates seems to think that musical people don't try to outdo other musical people, but only unmusical people. Because after all, unmusical people are ignorant of music. So after all, it's easy for them to do that. And in fact, if you noticed in the text, starting on page 27, Socrates and Thrasymachus talk in such a way that, I'm going to move the camera just a little bit. They talk in such a way that we're trying to figure out if the unjust and just person, do they want to outdo others like them and or unlike them? Do they feel as if they deserve to do so? And are they able to? All three of these come into play in the text at this point. Does that make sense? And it's not quite the same thing to say, I want to outdo somebody. Maybe I'm not able to, though, right? I want to outdo somebody. I deserve to outdo this person. I'm better than them in some way. I deserve to be rewarded and they don't. Versus, I am able to outdo this person because they lack capacities that I have. Do you see what's going on here? And so, Socrates is setting things up this way because I think he has this kind of thing in mind. When we're talking about acting in a group for some common purpose, it's important. When musical people, they compete with each other to some degree, but in the long run, they have to cooperate. Otherwise, the orchestra will not harmonize. Does that make sense? Does that argument seem to hold? Likewise, any unjust group of people, for them to achieve any common purpose, Socrates argues, some degree of justice has to exist between them. They have to treat each other well. Otherwise, they can't achieve this common purpose. Otherwise, they'll start fighting with each other, right? As Socrates says in the middle of page 31, they will cause factions, hatreds, and quarrels between themselves. And at that point, they won't be able to get anything done. Whereas justice seems to bring friendship and harmony, right? And common purpose. By the way, the Greek word for purpose is very important here. Telos. This is a very important word. Telos. Telos. It's important because for the ancient Greeks, purpose was part of the telos of something was part of the nature or function of a thing. Okay? A natural part of it. Not just a willy-nilly chosen part, but it's part of the nature of that thing. So trees, assuming that they don't get blown down by the wind or eaten up by bugs or harmed in some other way by some external source, as long as they get sunlight and water and enough nutrients from the soil and all of that, what do trees do? They naturally grow into a full mature tree, correct? That's the purpose of the seed of the tree that got planted in the soil in the first place, is to grow in fully into a mature tree. That's the telos there. Well, what's the question here? What's the telos of being human? Is it justice? Is justice the telos of being human? Is there a proper function to being human? Now, today we live in an age where a lot of people think I can do whatever I want. Thrasymachus thinks the proper function of being human is pursuing power to the farthest degree that I can so that I can wield power over others. That's the true function of being human. Is it? Or is there another better way for human beings to live? Justice, when it's present, seems to be kind of the strength of harmonizing with others. Injustice, on the other hand, causes factions, hatreds, and quarrels and conflicts, right? So, Socrates ends book 2 by showing, seemingly to show, injustice does not prove to be a form of knowledge, but a form of ignorance. It does not seem to be a true function, but the absence of a function. Something that detracts from a function, from human function. It creates quarrels and conflicts, not harmony and common purpose. In fact, if I have a lot of injustice within my own soul, I'm at odds and at war with myself. My desires fight one another. My desires fight against my reason. My moral purpose fights with my desires fight with my moral purpose in life. And now I can't get along with the others either if injustice reigns in my soul. This is what Socrates is arguing. And it's interesting, though, and we're almost done now. Socrates seems to conclude at the end that injustice is not stronger and better and more advantageous than justice and makes one happier. Justice is what provides for those things. Justice gives us harmony and strength and harmony within ourselves, harmony between us and others. Justice seems to be responsible for happiness and proper advantage and strength, etc. Justice seems to be a virtue, a proper function, a proper telos. All of that is connected. It seems to be what is properly natural to us. And yet, what have we abandoned? We've abandoned the original question, Socrates says at the very end of book 1 on page 35. I started chasing these other questions about justice, and I left behind our original question, which is, what is justice? Can justice be defined? If so, what is the proper definition of justice? So we haven't really achieved anything if we seem to have shown that justice is more advantageous than injustice, if somehow we failed, we haven't yet defined justice. We failed to define justice, right? Do you see the problem here? See? So we're left with at least 3 questions and probably more at the end of book 1. What is justice? So write these down. What is justice? Is justice a virtue or a vice? After all, though, let me touch on something real quickly. that I kind of didn't spend enough time on previously. An argument can be made, on the other hand, that if one went around just being just all the time, one is going to leave oneself open to being taken advantage of by other people. That's what Thrasymachus would say, right? And I bet you were thinking about that because you're good students, right? So, because we haven't defined what justice is, can we really say that it's a strength and not a weakness? Maybe it is kind of naive, as Thrasymachus says, to just go around being just all the time. Well, so that's our second question, though. So first question is, what is justice? Question number 2 is justice a virtue or a vice, a strength or a weakness, an advantage or a disadvantage? And the third question is, can justice make one happy or does it make one unhappy? Does justice make one happy or unhappy? Okay? Do you see how the text is materializing? Now, to help set up the opening of Book 2, and I'm going to try and get this video out soon, we've got to pick up some ground, make up some ground here, I know. But Book 1, as you can see, is very complex. There's a lot going on in Book 1, and there's a lot to think about, okay? But the opening of Book 2, we see Glaucon and Adeimantus give their own arguments about what they think is going on with justice and injustice, right? If you have not yet read Book 2, please go ahead and read it now, okay? Read it very carefully. There's a lot going on in Book 2 as well. But I'm hoping you're truly interested in the topic at this point. But in the opening pages of Book 2, Glaucon, remember Glaucon? Glaucon? Glaucon gives an argument about what he thinks is going on with justice. And he starts by talking about 3 different kinds of good. So see if you can locate those and figure out what those are for next time, okay? Then he defines justice, and I want to see if you can figure out where that definition is located in the text. How does Glaucon define justice? And then Glaucon tells 2 different stories to support his definition, okay? 2 different stories. And one is about a magical ring, and the other is about a man who is perceived as just, a man who is just. He is a just man, a thoroughly just person, but he is perceived by everyone else around him to be unjust. And you see the consequences of that. Though he is unjust, he's perceived as unjust. What happens to him? Okay? So those are in the opening pages. And then Adeimantus also gives his argument. And his argument's very interesting because he focuses on different stories that are told about justice that we're raised with as kids into young adults. And I bet you've encountered these kinds of stories as well. And they're very different kinds of stories that make it very confusing to think clearly about justice. Okay? So read Book 2, and I hope you're taking good notes. I thought, now no one responded to my announcement to respond via email to let me know you received the announcement. So can you please, everyone, respond and let me know what you're thinking at this point, okay? What you're thinking. And so, let's do this. I put it in the announcement, just a casual writing assignment is all I wanted. I want a 2-page response paper, and I tell you what, why don't you respond to any part of the text that we've covered so far? What are you thinking about it at this point? Can you give me just 2 pages of a reflection paper on some aspect of book 1? And let's have that due in a couple of days. Don't worry too much about how well it's written. Just give me some thoughts that you're thinking about, okay? And read book 2 as well. Let's have book 2 read by Thursday, okay? I think that's not too hard to do, okay? Well, thank you for your time and your attention. I hope now that we've gotten into the nitty-gritty of things, that the text is opening up and things are making more sense, and yet I hope you also have a lot of questions. If you have any questions, the only way I know if you've got questions is if you contact me through email, okay? So please email me, all right? Everyone, please email me and let me know where you're at. And I need you to read book 2 by Thursday and give me a 2-page response by Wednesday, okay? Thank you very much and hope to hear from you very soon. Take care. Bye.